Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. In this week's video, and also videos in the future, I'm going to look at putting together a live electronic setup so you can perform out live, you can perform your songs. If you're like me, you've been making music for a while, and you might have been lucky enough to being able to DJ or something like that, but if you're like me, I've always had this itch to play the songs live, to kind of do a live remix or a live replay of the song. So I've been putting this off for so long, and I've gone through so many iterations in my head that I thought, now is the time, let's put it together and I can document it all. Then hopefully you guys can see some of the mistakes I make, and then hopefully you won't make the same mistakes yourself. But hopefully that it just gives you some more guidance on how to put together a live set and a live performance rig, and yeah, so then you can obviously make the most of it and perform your songs out live. So some things that would dictate the performance rig that you're going to put together, and that is obviously the style of music that you're playing. If you come from like more of a guitar background and you're playing guitar, obviously you might want to incorporate that. If you want to play piano on top of some backing tracks, are you going to play the piano or synths live? Are you going to play all the parts or play some of the parts? Do you just want to have some backing tracks so you can maybe sing and play an instrument over the top? Or do you want it to feel a little bit more on the rails, and you're just kind of tweaking things as you go, and then kind of maybe looping sections and maybe making it more of a live remix? So for the two setups that I am looking to put together, I want to do one that's more sort of in the house and techno sort of acid house sort of world, and then the other one is going to be more in the electronica sort of world. Sort of think about maybe, what's some artist? Maybe like inspiration from like Moderat or Bonobo or something like that. And then on the acid house side, maybe think about Rex the Dog or Paranoid London. So one of the big things you have to think about when putting together the live set is, are you going to use a computer or not going to use a computer? For mine, I don't want to use a computer just because I know that I'll get sucked into just looking at the screen, and I don't want to have that quote unquote Serato face of just like staring dead at a screen, where I'm not sort of feel like I'm performing them too much. I feel like maybe I'm just, people might think that I'm just like sending emails or something like that. So it's a big thing to consider, and I don't take anything away from people that use a computer and use Ableton. But for me, I didn't want to use a computer, so I looked at some other different options for that. Next thing that I really wanted to consider, because I'm looking to kind of do two sets, is how modular is the setup. And I'm not talking about dragging a modular synth out. I'm just talking about how easy is it to interchange different pieces. Like maybe I have one drum machine, but that's good, but I want to change it for another drum machine for the other set. Or I have a synth and I want to change that for another synth. Same with the bass, and same with the other elements. So maybe some other drums and backing tracks and other bits and pieces like vocal samples and stuff like that. So the next thing to consider is a mixer. Now, if you're using any hardware synths, at some point you're going to have to get it into a mixer so then you can get it to the front of house. You can obviously run something that's a little bit bigger, and maybe like a Mix Wizard or a Mackie or something like that. But for mine, I chose the 1010 Blue Box. And the reason why I chose this is because you can see we've got the 6 inputs. These are all stereo inputs, which is awesome. We have some outputs here, so you can use them for sends and returns. And then obviously we also have monitoring. We have this USB, so we can connect a MIDI controller to it to control other bits and pieces, like the levels within the mixer and stuff like that. And then if you flip it around, we have the SD card, and then we have the MIDI in and out. So the MIDI in and out is going to be really good, because then we can clock multiple elements together. So obviously this is one thing to really consider. You can see in the last video where we went and looked at Cron's studio, they're using the big like DJ style mixes, and that works really well with them because of all the elements they have. But for me, I'm just one person and I'm going to be using minimal equipment compared to a setup that they have, so I find that the blue box was the one to go. And full disclosure, they did give me a little bit of a discount, but I still paid like a decent amount for it, so it's not like I got it for free. I've been looking around for a while now and I found that this was like the way to go. So what we can do is we can just kind of come in here and we want let's put this in here. This is going to be mix. So we have our mixer set up. So next up, a thing that you really need to consider, especially if you're just one person and you want to play multiple instruments at once, is a sequencer. Now these can vary from something like the Arturia. You can just see it up there, the little white line, but this is the KeyStep Pro, the BeatStep Pro, and also the KeyStep Pro. You can use them as a sequencer, but for me, again, I went with 1010 Music and I went with the black box. Now this one I did get secondhand, so I still did pay like a decent amount for it. And the reason why I chose this is obviously we have a lot of outputs here, but then we can also put MIDI clips into it. We can import MIDI clips and import other samples and stuff like that, so we can kind of do live remixes. Also, when you bring up a new project, you can have program changes for the synths, and this is going to be especially good, not so much for the acid side, but for the other project, if I want to change the sound completely, this will be a perfect sort of addition to that. So let's come along and we can add that in there. Q, that's a Q. We'll just, yeah. It looks like C, but it's a Q. And again, if you're using a computer and with Ableton, kind of the sequencer side is all taken care of. If you've got an audio interface, you pretty much could just run the mixer and sequencer all from Ableton and then just have an audio interface with the stereo out going into front of house. So just some things to consider if you don't want to go sort of no computer. If you're happy using a computer, Ableton will kind of disperse with those two pieces of equipment, and you can go from there. So the next thing is clocking. How are you going to sync everything up together? For me, that was one of the reasons why I chose the blue box, because it has its own clock and you can use the mixer and kind of a master clock or the clock source as the main piece. So I can use that to clock the sequencer so that both the 1010 boxes can be synced together. And then also I can use it to sync other instruments and drum machines and stuff like that that have built-in sequences. So maybe like the TR8 or the analog rhythm or something like that. Let's come along here and we'll put clock. It's going from there and it's going to go into there. And the last thing that I want to consider before kind of getting in and putting everything together is the instruments. Now for the acid sort of techno, house techno sort of set, it kind of dictates itself. I'm going to be using the TB303. I'm going to be using the Roland TR8, which is the older one. It doesn't have the samples, but it has 909, 808, 707 samples in there. So that's pretty much what I want for that sort of set. And then I'm going to be using the Novation Peak over the top to kind of add those live synth lines, maybe pads, stabs, and stuff like that. I'm also going to be pulling other samples and sounds and everything like that from the black box. But again, with your setup, you might have something else to play samples. You might have like a Digitech or another sampler to kind of play those samples. I know Enrique uses an Octatrack and some other bits and pieces. So it just depends on what your what you want your playback to be and how you want to have those sounds like ready to go will dictate what elements you want to have in there. And again, you could have Ableton, you could just have just Ableton and a MIDI controller and kind of do it all from there. But for me, I kind of wanted a little bit more hands-on with everything. So what we can do is we can go. This would be the TR8. We can go the peak. And then up here, 303. Now the clock I've got here, we can use that to clock the TR8. And then we can use this sequencer to control the 303 and control the peak. We can have the audio from the peak coming into the mixer, audio from the 303 coming into the mixer, and audio from the TR8 also coming into the mixer. And then one other piece that I kind of wanted to add into this that the Blue Box allows is outboard processing, so you can have your own delays, reverbs and stuff like that. So we can also just add, oh, not that side, here, effects, and we can like that. For the clock, I'm gonna run a Kenton MIDI through, so 1 in, 5 out, so we can separate this clock. And I think that's going to be about it for that. The next video, I'm going to put it all together. I'm going to have a couple of little samples with the sequencer, and we can test out the whole setup. And from there, we're going to look at grabbing our songs from our sessions that we've finished, how we can separate them up into parts, put them into the sequencer. Maybe that's Ableton, same deal for you guys. But for me, it's going to be the black box, and then how we can perform one song. And then from there, we're going to look at how we can transition through multiple songs. Obviously with the acid set, going to be wanting to be able to play continuous. We want that music going. We don't want have to stop everything and then play again. So having that clock going all the time and having the drums going all the time is going to be a good way to kind of bridge project to project on the black box. So yeah, it's going to be a fun little adventure, and then hopefully you guys can see what's going on and get some ideas for yourself. And at the end of the day, hopefully this inspired you to create something. Until next time, see you later.